here. 129 unders, 109 overs, 97 and 75 to the under with a total of 132.5 for higher, which obviously isn't very high of a number. I think this is one of the better under arenas in the tournament there in Des Moines at the Wells Fargo Arena. So keep that one in mind as you're handicapping these games. Veterans Memorial in Jacksonville, 15 and 11 to the under. Not a big enough sample size to know much there. If you move the numbers there to a higher total, it doesn't do much of anything. And then Nationwide Arena in Columbus, 7 and 5 to the under. This is a place I've been very many times before. Nothing strikes me as bad about this venue for shooters. It's a really nice place. I don't think this is a big under arena at all.
Yeah, definitely the low sample sizes to watch out for. But like you said, with Wells Fargo, you got a larger one there to the under. Colonial Life, it looks like 103 and 93 to the under. Absolutely. Those are two that people should probably key in. Yeah, the SAP Center's been around since 1993 from what I'm seeing online. So maybe they just haven't played there that much. I don't know. Could have been a renovation too. But some just don't have the data that we can really check out for tournaments. Let's look into some of the home court advantages in the tournament. Are there any that stick out to you?
Well, I'm going to say the one here that's close to home for me. I'll say Cincinnati with a really big home court advantage in Columbus against both Iowa and then Tennessee if they make it to there. And I'll say, as someone who I'm going to the game on Sunday, so, I'm hoping Cincinnati is in that game, partially because I root for Cincinnati since I'm from Ohio. If they're not playing Ohio State, but, I root for Cincinnati if they're not playing Ohio State. And then also I really want it to be a good environment. I want there to be a bunch of Bearcats fans at the same time. There's a bunch of North Carolina and Tennessee fans, things like that. So, I think Cincinnati will have a very big home court advantage in Columbus. Cincinnati basketball fans are a pretty passionate group. I think there's going to be plenty of them there. I think that makes that a really tough first game for Iowa, a team that's already been, slumping a bit. So, big home court advantage there for Cincinnati. I think that New Mexico State, they're not right by home here, Salt Lake City. So I'm not saying, they just have a short bus trip or something like that. It's that they play at altitude at home. I mean, they're used to the high elevation. Auburn is certainly not used to that. Nothing about Auburn would make them accustomed to playing at a high elevation. Right. Nothing in the SEC would make them accustomed to that. So,
right.
That hurts Auburn, certainly. I'm not saying New Mexico State's going to win that game. I just think that is something that plays into the factor to help out New Mexico State in some way. UC Irvine, the other one I'll say, really nice home court advantage there in that game against Kansas State. Kansas State's a team that a lot depends on Wade's health. You and I both know this. This is a guy that means a lot to this team. Kansas State's going to play good defense regardless of whether he's in there or not. But they're not very good offensively if Wade's not playing. And if he's not playing, that hurts Kansas State's upside quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that game for sure coming up here. I definitely agree with you. Cincinnati in their backyard there, man. It's like Iowa's going to play Ohio State almost right there. New Mexico State, I looked at that one. It's a far travel, but it's still the West Coast and it's in the mountains. Like you said, it makes total sense. Auburn, has an interesting spot right there. UC Irvine, definitely a nice home court advantage against K-State. That's what everyone's thinking. And plus, does everyone want to travel there from K-State thinking D Wade's not going to play, right? So very, very good points on that one. Well, my man, let's get into some games, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start right out with Minnesota versus Louisville. Louisville's laying about 5 points. The over-under is at 135. This game is in Des Moines, Iowa. Any thoughts in this one?
Well, I mean, this is the game that's at the venue that's been a bit of an under venue, and I'll say the way I want to start this out is I'll say what the bets are looking like on the odds screen. Louisville has 63% of the public bets so far. Minnesota getting 52% of the money, so you could say there's a bit of a sharp tilt toward Minnesota in this game. I would disagree with that. I think Louisville is my lean in this one. I don't know that I'm going to play this game. Minnesota is a really inconsistent team. I think Louisville's probably the best number 7 seed in this tournament. I'd have to lay the points here or pass. If you look at Ken Palm, he has a luck factor, which I like to look at this, especially in the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. See who got lucky, who got unlucky. Louisville's 301st in luck factor this year, so they got very unlucky. 301st out of 353 teams, according to Ken Palm. Minnesota 24th in luck factor, so they certainly got lucky this season. Minnesota not a good shooting team. They rely heavily on getting offensive rebounds. Louisville much better on the defensive glass than most teams that Minnesota would be playing throughout the course of the season. I also think there's some bias against Louisville because everybody remembers Louisville with that collapse against Duke and then how they played right after that. But Louisville really has been a pretty solid team this season outside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Louisville, gosh, they started out really well here. Maybe some of that Minnesota money is that whole Richard Pitino avenge his father. You want, I mean, it's silly. It's absolutely silly. And he's many times saying he's his own man. Look, whatever my dad did, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think that's a stupid narrative, but of course everybody's talking about it. So you wonder. The other factor is Minnesota is only 240 miles from Des Moines, Minneapolis there, right down I-35. So I guess that's kind of a home court advantage. And I don't know how excited Louisville fans are going to travel there after, I think they had maybe a little bit higher expectations. They did make the tournament there, but that's the only thing I could think of. The Gophers average about 46.6 field goals at home. If you're going to look at the home, of course, away, they average only 40.7 field goals. So they're a terrible away team. So what's going to happen here? Jordan Murphy and Amir Curry, very, very good players. Louisville, they average about 72.7 points per game on the road. They give up about 69.7. They've shown greatness. Remember they almost beat Duke. They choked that away. They beat North Carolina on the road.
Yeah,
I believe they beat Michigan State too. Louisville, they're more capable of blowing this team out. Louisville's got the better offense and defense, but the last month they've just been kind of ice cold in the ACC. And Minnesota had a nice little run, beating Purdue twice, Penn State, and Northwestern. My raw numbers have Louisville by 4.5, but if this was really a truly neutral spot, and those are raw numbers, if the Gophers really have a home court advantage, I lean Minnesota plus the points, but this is definitely not a play for me right now.
Let me say one more thing about that game. I think the Louisville fan base does travel pretty well, so I think that won't be quite as much of a home court advantage as what it might seem like it would be. I will say, but I like your point about the Pitino narrative here. If you're going to bet Minnesota in this game, I don't know that I'm going to bet Louisville, and it would not surprise me if Minnesota covers the number. I'm not saying that I think Louisville's any kind of lock. There is no such thing, obviously, but if you're going to bet Minnesota, don't use the Pitino narrative as your reason for doing it, because that would be the worst reason to bet Minnesota.
Absolutely. Please do not do that. It has nothing to do with it. I mean, if anything, maybe Louisville would be mad, and come in extra motivated, want to beat his son. You can look at things both ways. It's a stupid narrative. Please do not buy into those things. And if anything, use some of those narratives to your advantage.
Right.
So, be watching the line. I don't have that big of a side on this one. Let's move into another game that everyone's talking about. Yale versus LSU. LSU laying about 7 points now. It's down to 7. Over-under's 159.5. That's a pretty tall over for 7 points when you're looking at an LSU team that should have been a 2 seed possibly if their coach Will Wade wasn't suspended and they didn't blow that first game against Florida here. Do you have some thoughts on this one?
Yeah, first of all, Yale getting 62% of the bets, 60% of the money. So, this is a public underdog. This is also, the sharps don't mind this one either. So this one's both ways. I think there's some sharp money on Yale. I think there's some public money on Yale at this point. I can't lay the points with LSU in this game. LSU has far too many question marks for me to be laying 7 or 7.5 points. Tons of talent for LSU. No doubt they have the talent to, run Yale off the court if they're playing their best. The problem for me is LSU has been pretty inconsistent this year. Let's look at their bad showings this year. Mm-hmm. A loss to Oklahoma State on a neutral, overtime comeback win against Missouri. That was a game that they should have lost. Missouri really collapsed in that game. LSU played a ton of overtime games this year, 6 overtime games. LSU, their huge thing on offense is they're so good on the offensive glass. I think the big key in this one, can Yale get the defensive rebounds? That's what they've got to focus on here. LSU can't get 2 or 3 shots every time. They do that, they're going to win this game, probably cover the number. I think as far as a 14 and a 3 seed, if you had to pick, I'm going to take 1 14 seed over a 3 seed as a big upset. Now, I'm not going to pick it in my bracket, so that's not what I mean. But I do think Yale's a pretty solid 14 seed. They played some pretty tough non-conference games. This is a Yale team that has a lot of veterans on it, some pretty high-end talent also. I think this is a team that's much better than a normal 14 seed. Could a huge upset happen here? I think it's at least possible. I would lean to the over in this game too. I think the fact that it's a 7-point spread would suggest that there's certainly the chance that there could be a lot of fouling at the end of the game. You get a spread of 6, 6.5, 7, 8 points, somewhere in there. If it's actually that at the end of the game, I know you've seen this and we've all seen it. At the end of these games, it can get really epic, these foul fests. So, there could be 30 points in the last 2 minutes and it wouldn't be totally stunning if the spread is at that. So I would lean toward Yale here. I don't love that the public likes this so much, and I'll say that several times here today. The trendy underdogs have not done well in the long run. So that's my biggest negative on taking Yale here. The biggest plus to taking Yale is I feel like LSU has lots of turmoil right now.
With Will Wade suspended, the Tigers are going to completely give up on this season, and they're just going to go in there and fold. That's what that's what everybody's saying right now. They don't care. It's their best season they had since 2006. I got to tell you, I hate the situation at LSU, but I really like the spot here. I think the fact that this happened before the SEC tournament and they dropped that team and dropped this game at Florida really makes me think that LSU can pull this one together and kind of make up for their season. They lose this game, nobody's even going to remember the season here. So I love the fact that everybody's dogging LSU, and you can just keep watching this line coming down here. But the truth is, this LSU team, you're right, they've played down to teams that were bad, and they played up to teams that were good. But the fact that everybody is down on them, and trust me, they're watching SportsCenter, these kids. These kids are watching everybody downing them. They know what these spreads are. I have a feeling guys like Nas are going to go out there and absolutely go completely off. You look at Yale, they've had a hard schedule, but their best game was against Miami. Sorry, their best win was against Miami. And that was 77-73. They dropped to Memphis, they dropped to Vermont. When they played Duke, they lost by 33 points. If you are ever going to be on LSU without their coach, I think this is possibly the best spot to start backing them. So personally, I'm going to play LSU when this line goes as far down as it possibly can.
I was going to say, I think you make some fair points there. I like the point about the fact that LSU has that one game that they already blew one game. So they had the first game against Florida. That was their ugly game right after the Will Wade news. If the Will Wade news had just broken right before the NCAA tournament, I would definitely bet Yale in this game. No doubt about that. I likely won't bet Yale. I think it's too much of a public underdog for my liking. And I will say, I think that this line might even go down some more. I won't be surprised if we get LSU -6.5 here. So I think if you like LSU, you probably want to wait.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this narrative is just going to keep going. People licking their chops. I wonder what the Sharps' real side is going to be. That's something you don't always know until an hour or two before the game, but you definitely, want to keep watching this line. And you don't have to bet it. Just, if you kind of think in LSU, watch it for a little while. Right now it's trending down. You could have a